That's why we don't trust anybody. I don't trust to call Jesus's father Yahweh. And the reason I don't trust that is because I don't trust the scholars and I don't trust the rabbis. Because they've lied about everything else, why not lie about this? And I'm like, Jesus never said that. I'm not convinced. Okay. Same thing with Jehovah. Same thing with all of these things. And then to make it worse, they took out the names of the gods in the Bible and made everything Lord. Welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. Energy. You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Love for all those in the steps. All of those who are listening. Don't listen left is judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing, okay? We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis on this channel. Because, you know, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post-Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
All right, here we are in the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is approximately 3000 BC to 1000 BC. It's really not those years. It's like 3500 or 3600 to like 1200 BC. Okay. And remember, BC, the years are going backwards. So 1000 BC is closer to us than 3000 BC. You got to reverse everything. The clock is ticking backwards. So this is a giant span of time, but I don't like to work. My brain can't function that way. So rather than like 36 to 12, I just rounded off close the fuck enough. It's 2000 fucking years here. Okay. So from like 3000 to 1000, right? BC, before zero, we've got a 2000 year span. Think of the history of the United States, like 1776 to like 2024. It's like a couple hundred years. This is a couple thousand year span in the Bronze Age. Okay. This is where all of the mythologies are being handed down from, like Adam and Eve and, Noah and the flood and crossing over and Moses and all that stuff falls into this period of time. Okay. Now let's take a look at our Bronze Age map. And I want you to see that big red X. That big red, that little tiny, teeny red X, I'm being facetious, takes up literally all of Israel and then some. I couldn't make it small enough to just give you Israel. I certainly couldn't make it small enough to give you Jerusalem. Okay. So that covers like Israel and then some. Okay. Now to give you an idea of scope of size, the map over here, the other map, you can see I've got a green dot at New York City-ish. Okay. And the two with the circle going around New York City, that's if you took a direct airline flight with a direct flight path, like no stopping over in fucking Atlanta, right? If you just got in a private plane and just went, this is a 2-hour flight radius around New York. I want you to take a long look at that and how far you can fly in the United States in 2 hours. If you go down to the next one, that's where you can be in 4 hours. So in a 4-hour flight, I can be from New York City to fucking Nicaragua or the coast of Venezuela or way beyond the upper regions of Canada. Okay. Now, a 2-hour flight zone from right here, I want you to look at Cairo. Okay. If you just move that arrow down south a little bit, you see this big, long, snaky looking waterway that comes up from the bottom. It's like a big, long penis sticking up here. Right at the top of that penis, we've got Cairo, Egypt. Okay. You can fly from Cairo straight north and land in Athens or in Istanbul, Turkey in 2 hours. Okay. So we're talking about this region is not really big. The next thing I want you to notice is during the Bronze Age, you've got all of these blue lines going through the Mediterranean Sea, all around here with Italy and the boot, over here to the Strait of Gibraltar. This is the south of Spain and northern Morocco. This is also northern Libya and all of those countries, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Spain, the islands. Here in the middle, we've got Malta, we've got Sardinia, we've got all the Aegean Sea. The Aegean means Greece. We've got Turkey, all sailing across here. We're going all the way down the coast of Saudi Arabia to Yemen and all of our African countries. And then over here in the Gulf, we've got going all the way to India through all of these Middle Eastern countries. Okay? All the way through here. And that's just sea, people. That's not even land, people, that are moving throughout this region. Okay? Turkey is quite literally the center of the world. And you can see Turkey outlined there in red. It's quite literally the middle of the planet. You get to Africa in 12 seconds. You get to Eastern Europe and Western Europe in 12 seconds. You get all the way up to Russia and the Black Sea and, all the Eastern Europe, Slavic-speaking countries, all the way over here to your Middle East and your Far East, down to India, into the Arab, the strong Arab areas, right? And then all the way down through Africa. And right over here, like, you got China. Like, you can't get more middle of the world than this. And if you go far enough through China, you're coming right over into Alaska and straight down the Americas into Central and South. And we're talking thousands of years just in the Bronze Age. So this isn't a big area. And Israel and Jerusalem is the tiniest little spit within this not very big area. So everything's very conveniently located, if you will. So in our brains, we think of Israel and Canaanite because the land of Israel, quote unquote, what you think today of modern Israel, okay, just think of the modern state of Israel. That's Canaan. In biblical terms, it's called Canaan or Canaan. And we think of it as the left. Okay, that's the people who own this land. And they're fighting the people over here on the camels, who are these random desert marauding people who are like, eating babies and sacrificing children to Moloch, right? The baby eaters. So these nomadic tribes, and then the civilized come in, and this is how we see it. This versus this. That's not accurate history at all. So let's get into it and figure out what it is. When you think of pre-Israel, I want to call it ancient Phoenicia. When you look at the pre-Israel landmass, okay, in the Bronze Age, I want you to think of American. I don't want you to think of Israel. I don't want you to think of Judah. I want you to think of America. I want you to think of New Jersey, okay? Because the land of Israel, or Canaan, is about the size of New Jersey. And in this area of New Jersey, was very, very much, even in the earliest times of the Canaanites, when Abraham was crossing over, even in the Bronze Age, this was the population. It was this diverse. So every single picture you see here can be described as an American. But they're wildly different people, language, ethnicities, political views, religious views, traditions, families, places of origin. The original Canaanites throughout history are very much like this. So it's not a monolithic group of one personhood, one ethnicity, one race, one group that just dominated all the others. No. And you're going to find out how this got so mixed. Canaan was the original melting pot. Let's put it that way. So the Bronze Age, what period are we talking about? We've got Noah's Ark and the flood. We've got the Tower of Babel with Nimrod, right, in his rebellion against God. We've got Abraham and Isaac's story with Abraham and the crossing over. We've got Isaac has a son named Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. If you saw my Revelation, you're up with this. We've got a story about Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, and then they ran around Egypt for a while. Okay. Then Moses delivers them out of Egypt, and that's the Exodus and the road trip from hell, where they wander in the desert for 40 years. Then we've got Joshua, who came after Moses and got everybody up and over the mountains and into the quote-unquote promised land, or this Israel Canaan land. Okay? Then we've got the capture of the promised land promised to God by Abraham. The capture of the promised land means they had to go to war with every motherfucking buddy that was already there in order to stake their claim on their settlements, which eventually became Judah and Israel. Okay, so you've got all these tribes of people, and they're going in there, and they're fighting everybody around them to settle their land. Okay, that's what it means. That takes us through the judges or the leaders and all the way through King Saul and King David. So King David is sort of our marker. The Bronze Age, quote unquote, mythology collection of biblical stories. These were all in the oral Semitic language because they're archaic. They weren't having a written language. Okay. So they're writing in these weird hieroglyphic looking characters and telling their stories and handing them down and passing them down through an oral tradition. Okay. So everything pre-Noah is the Stone Age. Everything from Noah until David is the Bronze Age. Okay. And I put Abraham 2000 because he was right about a good marker for about right in the middle of the Bronze Age, right? We said it's like from 3000 BC to 1000 BC. Think of Abraham right around 2000 BC. So he's right in the middle of the Bronze Age. And then you go another 1,000 years and you get to David. And when you get to David, the Bronze Age is over and we're now in the Iron Age. It's about 200 years after the Bronze Age finished. The Iron Age is starting and we've got David. Okay. Remember, the judges, well, we'll get to that. We'll get there in a minute. In the Bronze Age, from about 3000 to 1200, I called 1000, whatever. One of the things that happened, a lot of things happened, but after Abraham crosses over into the land of Canaan, and then everyone gets hauled off to Egypt, okay, and there's slaves in Egypt. The slave trade happened. They got brought down to Egypt. They're living in there for a good ass long time. And then Moses hauls them over across the Red Sea right here. And they're wandering in the desert, which is my red scribble line for like 40 fucking years. All right. Because they couldn't get their shit together. And that's what I call the road trip from hell. Eventually, they make it up to the promised land and cross over the mountains. Well, the reason I have this scribble mark here is while they're wandering in the Saudi Arabian desert, getting the 10 commandments and dicking around and not getting their shit together, someone meets God along the way. Okay? So now they're importing the God that they met along the way, and they're importing this God into the land of Canaan. So they're bringing their God with them, if you will. And that's why they're carrying God around in the tabernacle. Okay? Because in ancient times, gods were attached to the land in the area. So God would have to come down and physically live someplace. So they built him the RV, that's the traveling tabernacle that God lived in. And they're bringing this God with them into the land of Canaan, which we now think of as Israel. So they got this imported God from the deserts of Saudi Arabia. And that's their God. That God is named Yahweh. All right. You with me so far? Whether Yahweh is or isn't the same name of the God that Noah met, the God that Abraham met, the God that Melchizedek met, is debatable. And we'll talk about that. But just know that for now, some God appeared to Abraham, someone named God appeared to, Moses and Joseph and all these other characters back in the Stone Age. And here we are in the Bronze Age, and we're bringing them over and back up through the Exodus. So this mythology, okay, is this Arab desert storm god and war god was named Yahweh. And this was a cult of a very small tribe of warlords, okay? And this god was imported and assimilated into the Canaanite pantheon of other gods because there were a bazillion gods. They were not monotheistic. They had a bazillion gods. Then we have Baal. our war storm god, who's the same thing, right? We've got a Yahweh war storm god, and we've got a Baal war storm god. And that Baal god is native to the indigenous people in the Canaanite region. And there are all kinds of different names. You got Baal Bayak and Baal. How about you? We went through this, right? All the names of the Baal just means Lord, okay? And all of these are battling for dominance. So this Baal character is like the top god of the Canaanites, indigenous people. And Yahweh is the top dog that's being imported with your quote unquote Israelites, your Jacobites moving into town. So they're bringing Yahweh with them. And then the people there already have their Baal and their Baals. And so Yahweh and Baal are going to battle for dominance throughout the Bronze Age. All right. To this day, you still have a Baal and Betula tradition because Baal isn't necessarily seen as a bad thing in Jewish culture. It just means Lord, Master, Husband. Okay. But that name was given to all the janky ass gods, which is why I'm telling you this Baal Lord thing. Be careful which one you're talking about. Okay. This name Baal has been thrown around in English because it means master, the one I serve, if you will. So you can take that title of Baal and attach it to any of the false gods, fake gods, demon gods, Greek gods, Roman gods. You name the god, you can slick Baal in front of their name in any language. Okay? And it means Lord, because Baal means the one I serve, my master. Remember, Baals are attached to the land. So when you move into a new area, you have to worship the god of that land, the Baal of that region, the Baal of that sect of people, because they're attached to the land. We actually see that in the Bible, but we're not there yet. So today, to this day, in Jewish tradition, when there's a wedding, because Baal also means owner, husband, they have a Baal and Betula tradition. So if two Jewish people get married, the guy's going to be called Baal all day, Lord, Master, and the girl's going to be called Betula, which is the original Hebrew word for never had sex virgin. Okay? So you've got your Baal and Betula, your Lord, your Master, and your virgin girl coming together in a wedding. And that's what they call them to this day in wedding ceremonies. All right, so that Baal word is really tricky. While all this is going on, you've got a northern Israel-ish, for lack of a better term, all of your tribes that are in the north of Canaan. They're evolving with their idea of what God is. And then you've got your southern Judah Benjamites who are evolving this idea of who this God is, that they imported with them across the place. So Yahweh develops in the south, and they're all about exclusivity. El develops in the north, and somewhere along the line, later on, when they can actually write shit down, they get mashed into one collection of stories. And so questions begin to arise. Who's who? So now, picking it up in the Bronze Age, right? We've got all these folks moving into the land. Now, what I want you to remember, we're going to go back for a second, okay? If we go back before 3000 BC, and we're talking about, quote unquote, the Stone Age, that's where you get the stories of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the very beginning of Genesis, okay? All the way up to Noah, all right? So, and the flood with Noah, we talk about this in Genesis, the ark, according to what they're digging through archaeology right now, this ark from the flood landed in the eastern mountains of Turkey in the Stone Age, okay? So we're all the way back over here in the eastern mountains of Turkey. So if you look at, I don't know if you can see my little thing that I'm moving around, but if you look at the title of this map says the ancient Near East, okay? And right under that, you have the Black Sea, Okay. Go under the Black Sea. There's a green area. Go down the green area to right where the top of the orangish area hits. That's the eastern mountains of Turkey, where we've got Noah's Ark. Okay. And proceed a little further to the south. And that's where we've got the birthplace of Abraham. And, Nimrod's down there. They got a whole mountain in Nimrod. And then you kind of go across to the right to like the dark blue and the light blue. And we get closer down to Babylon, right? Down in that, the next green pink area down by the Persian Gulf, all the way south on the right. Okay. But if we're staying up in like the blue, orange, gray area, that little top of the curve there. All right. This is where everyone originates. Okay. Garden of Eden is up there in the orange. Noah's Ark is up there in the orange. So when Abraham's born, sort of like in the orange gray area, that's Turkey and Syria, where Turkey and Syria today, by today's standards, would meet. So he's got to come down from basically Turkey, and he crosses over the Euphrates River and lands his ass into the land of quote unquote Canaan, or pre-Israel area, where my little arrow ends up. So Abraham gets there first. Remember, there's 2 migrations of people into the land of Canaan. The very first migration of quote unquote Gentiles, right, comes from Noah's Ark and the descendants of Noah's Ark, the Ham, Shem, Cush, all those guys, okay? Japheth, all of the sons are moving down. Abraham is the first one to cross over from Gentile Syria, Turkey, into the pink land of quote unquote Canaan or Israel. Okay. But it wasn't called Israel yet. It was Canaan. Then they get their asses hauled off to Egypt for slavery in Egypt. Then that's when Moses brings them back across into the Saudi desert, into the Scribble area, and then back up into the land. So they're actually returning to the land, right? And the promise that God made them was, I'm going to deliver you out of Egypt and bring you back up to where Abraham crossed over to begin with. That's the story. Okay. So the Gentile Abraham goes down into Canaan. They get hauled off into slavery. They get moved back across, wander in the desert, and then finally get their asses back up to where they started. Not quite back to where they started, but back to where Abraham started. So they make this little triangle thing. And during this triangle, this is all happening from Noah's Ark right on through. This is all happening during the Bronze Age. Everything before Noah, like Adam and Eve and creation and all that shit, that's Stone Age. Okay. Soon as Abraham's crossing over, that's the middle of the Bronze Age. Okay. So right after Noah, Abraham comes down, slavery in Egypt, crossing over, back up to the Promised Land. That's the triangle of the Bronze Age biblical story. And remember, when Abraham crossed over, he met God. Then, well, first of all, Adam and Eve knew God, right? Then Noah met God. Then Abraham met God. Then there's this weird guy in the desert named Melchizedek, and he met God. And we'll talk about him. He's really important when it comes to Jesus. We're coming up on him eventually. And then, Joseph met God, and then they're in Egypt, and then Moses meets God. And we got the whole Jacobite thing coming with Abraham, Isaac, and the sons of Jacob. And they're coming across. So I need you to remember that all these people are interacting with quote unquote God. And apparently God revealed himself, some of the stories say, in the desert and gave his name as Yahweh. So that's the storm war god. Why did we need a storm war god? Great question. Look where they are. Okay. We don't have great irrigation systems. There's no running water. Okay. We've got wells and oases and things like that. But this water was a big deal in the middle of Egypt and in the middle of the Saudi desert and in the middle of like all these areas. Water's a hot commodity. So if you don't have rain, there is massive famine in the land and people are getting wiped out left and right. So rain is a really big fucking deal for survival. The other thing is these are not necessarily civilized cities. Now, you do have some of those, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But aside from your major empires that you can see colored here, in all of these different quote unquote empires, you had these kings. And I want you to think, pharaohs of Egypt or, Alexander the Great. Now he comes along later, but just to give you an idea, right? Like these giant, massive kings of kingdoms, Xerxes from Gladiator, right, days, right? So all of these different areas have all of these different kings, quote unquote. But look where my scribble mark is. These guys are like Mad Max out in the desert. They are warlike tribes running into each other. Okay? They're not kingdoms necessarily. I mean, and they're all butting up against each other. So in between these kingdoms, they're not modern cities. So in between all of this, you've got these apocalyptic warlords running around, marauding each other, okay? And like a loose confederation of tribes, if you will. So yes, you've got your Egyptian kings, right? And you've got some kings way over in Macedonia up there in Greece and over here in Babylon. Like you've got these centers of really advanced civilization. But scattered throughout those cities are really, far apart. And when you get a little bit outside the city, you're pretty much dealing with warlords and these little loose confederation of tribes. Okay, so I said in the last one, like, who's who? This map is really important because I want you to look at the map on the left. These are the 12, quote unquote, tribes of Israel. And why this map is important is because, the Jacobites, basically, right? You've got your 12 different sons, okay? So you've got your son named Reuben, and your son named Judah, and your son named Dan, and your son named Ephraim. So all of these are lineages of one giant dysfunctional extended family, okay? And we're talking 1 million fucking people. So Dan is not necessarily getting along with Simeon, okay? Like they might not be friends. And they're like 14th fucking generation of I don't fucking like you, okay? Or I really like you. So there's like a lot of good blood, bad blood. There's family drama going on. Imagine 12 brothers, okay? That's what we're dealing with here. So they've all got their own, just think of your extended family coming together at Thanksgiving, okay? Now make it like 1 million, 500,000 fucking people, or 1 million fucking people, and like lots of good blood, lots of bad blood, and an apocalyptic warlord tribal thinking. So the tribe of Asher, or the tribe of Ephraim, or the tribe of Reuben don't necessarily get along with each other. Never mind, everybody else. Okay. So you can't think of quote unquote Jacob Israel as one monolithic group of people. You have to think of them as individual tribes that because they're from the same original family, they sort of made this confederation of people. However, they don't really get along. So they're a bunch of warlords leading each different tribal dysfunctional extended family. Okay, that's what we've got. And if you go to Thanksgiving dinner with your extended family, Dan and Asher aren't necessarily telling the same story about what happened with Aunt Betty 50 years ago. Everyone's gonna have their own take on the oral tradition of the stories of the family. I can tell a story, and my brother, who I grew up with, is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Or my mom's like, do you remember when? I'm like, that's not at all how I remembered it. And that's my immediate family. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands, hundreds of years, thousands of years, oral traditions, extended family, millions of people in apocalyptic warlord tribal groups. They don't have the same cohesive story and oral tradition to tell. Okay, so here we are in the Bronze Age, and we've got the map on the left, which gives us all of the tribes of the Jacobites, okay? Let's count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, now, there's a thing with Ephraim and Manasseh, and we're just going to call that for now Joseph, okay? Because there's a thing. All right. But we're going to leave that for a minute. We're not just whatever. It's Joseph, but it's Manasseh and Ephraim, and we'll get to that eventually. But just for now, okay, just imagine that you've got warlord extended family of 1 million fucking people, right? Spread all over this land and fighting everyone around them, and the baby eaters and the janky people and the Babylonians and the Phoenicians and the Egyptians, and there's all of this war and stuff going on, and empires keep changing hands, and that's how we get mixed up. I'm going to give you an example. All right. So Egypt is a major empire, and it comes up and over, around, and you've got the Egyptian influence, which includes all of the refugees that have fled to Egypt because of a famine, or fled out of Egypt, or have been taken, captives of war. They even relocated the Egyptians at one point. There were what they called the sea peoples, and we're not quite there yet, but the sea peoples would come over from, we don't know, Greece, Rome, somewhere in the Mediterranean. They would come down and raid everybody like ancient Viking tribes. And the Egyptians went to war with them and captured them, and then got sick of them. And then they we're going to put you all in a settlement because you're badasses. So we're going to put you over in what's now the Gaza Strip, where the war is happening, where they're bombing everyone in Gaza. They put them right there in Gaza and relocated these quote unquote sea people because they were such badasses. They're like, yeah, you're prisoners of war, but you're such badasses that we're going to line you up in Gaza to protect that border. So you've got moving, that's just one example, right? So you've got moving people depending on all of these empires that are coming and going over the span of thousands of years. And it's changed hands a lot. So here we've got our loose confederation of warlord tribes, okay, in this little tiny spit of land in the middle of the marauding, crazy-ass Bronze Age. All right, so we've got our apocalyptic warlords running around, leading these tribes. I want to remind you, take a look at the map, both maps. Gods are attached to the land, okay? So when Asher moves up, and that's really close to Lebanon, if you can see the tribe of Asher, the very northern kind of tan-looking tribe, right on the coast here above the green. Asher is butting up right against modern-day Lebanon, which is Phoenicia. And Dan is butting up right into Syria. Okay? Dan, Naphtali, Asher, even Zebulun are all up here in the Lebanon-Syria area. Okay? Judah is way the fuck down here by the Dead Sea, which is closer to the desert Negev and to the top of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, which goes all the way over here. And we're on both sides of the Dead Sea. We're on both sides of the Jordan River. The Jordan River flows between the Dead Sea in the south all the way north to that little round lake, which is a really important lake. That's where Jesus was. That's the Sea of Galilee, which is closer to Syria and Lebanon and Jordan than it is to Jerusalem down in Judah. Okay, the next thing I want to say about this little map. So, and the gods are attached to land. So when Asher or Dan moves far, far north, and they are fighting and assimilating and intermarrying and exchanging culture with all the people in that area, or who are being resettled from different empires, or are coming over because they're the sea people coming to the coast to trade, or they're still coming down or over from Babylon, right? So you've got, Greece, Rome, Turkey, Syria, Babylon, Iran, Iraq, Persia, Egypt. You've got so many places. And then all the people that are mixed into those places. So you've got European people, you've got Far East Asian people, you've got your tribes around Turkey and the Caucasus Mountains coming down. You've got your Arabs coming north and coming west. You've got everyone coming up from Africa through Egypt and in the Persian Gulf. And you have got such a conglomerate, this melting pot of people, okay? And they're intermarrying and they're exchanging culture and they're exchanging trade. And by the way, they're exchanging biles because they're attached to the land. So when Asher settles on the coast in the north, the original people and the traders and everyone who's there, this mixed conglomerate, this mosaic of people over thousands of years that have come and gone, their God is attached to the land. So you can see that in the warlord map. But you can also see it in the next map, which is the ancient Near East with that big red scribble mark, the map, the bigger map. And that's about, we'll say that's about 300 to 500 years before David. Okay. So the Egyptians have their own gods attached to the land, and like different areas in Egypt have different gods attached to the land. And then you've got your Macedonia, Greece gods, your Aegean gods, your island gods from Crete and Sardinia and the sea people, and all of these different things are attached to the land. But they've now imported their God, Yahweh, right? And so Yahweh is fighting the God that was already attached to the land to begin with. So we've got a Canaanite indigenous God versus the warlord imported God, if you will. So this is where you're getting the Yahweh versus Baal, and all the different Baals, because you can attach the name Baal to any of the gods, right? So he's always fighting these different Baals from these different parts of the land, because the original warlords, right, who were in the region at the time, and then these guys come in and they're fighting, all right? And all of this area, don't think of it as like city, like they're descending on, freaking San Antonio or something. Like these are rural areas, really rural areas. This isn't like, a metropolitan city like Alexandria or, Athens or, we're not thinking that way. This is really rural, tribal lands, okay? Nomadic, if you will, except for your city centers where your giant pharaohs live. Like in Babylon, there was a big ass city. But you get, 50 miles out of Babylon, there ain't shit happening. You get 20 miles out of Babylon, there ain't shit out there but a bunch of fucking goats, deserts, wells, and poor marauding tribal lunatics out in the desert. Okay, that's what we're dealing with here. So it's pretty rural, and it's Mad Max. It's The Walking Dead. Okay, it's The Walking Dead. It's Mad Max. Put that in your head. That's what we're dealing with here. Now, these gods that path to the land basically had a rule. And here's the rule. Ready? If you do what you're supposed to do, I'm going to give you land and prosperity and make it rain, and you're all going to live and you're going to win in war. Okay? So, because you need a god of war so you can beat off these marauding tribes of lunatics that are eating babies and sacrificing people and, raiding and raping and pillaging. Okay? Like, think pirates, think Vikings, warlords. So you need a good, strong war god. Okay? Just keep safe. You also need a really good storm god so that the rains come. All right? But you can't have too much of a storm god because you also don't want a flood that wipes everybody out. So you need a good prosperity, rain, stormy guy and a good war guy. And that's the attributes that they're giving to God, or who they call Yahweh, during the Bronze Age, because those were the two most important features of God. It wasn't like, oh, love and peace and old dude with a beard, sitting on the roof of the Sistine Chapel. Like, that's not what they were thinking God was. Okay, God is keeping them alive through marauding tribes of psychopaths and, famine. So those were the two most important attributes. So if you only look at the oral traditions handed down from all of these different tribes about this period of time in the Bible, their stories are going to be different because they're all different tribes. We talked about that. But they're also going to center around winning wars and being prosperous. So this is why in the Old Testament you've got this really warlike God who's like, fucking kill them all, because you're in that mode. So these weren't stories that were written. These were oral traditions and stories passed down through the generations. And how Judah told the story is very different than how Ephraim and Manasseh told the story. So you can imagine very, very quickly, questions begin to arise as to who's who, what name belongs to what God. Are they the same gods who are just adopting a different mask? It's a thing. That's why we don't trust anybody. I don't trust to call Jesus's father Yahweh. And the reason I don't trust that is because I don't trust the scholars and I don't trust the rabbis, because they've lied about everything else. Why not lie about this? So some scholars are like, oh, Yahweh was a small piss-on desert god that the Edomites imported. And we know the Edomites, well, they're, not great people in the Bible. And others are like, no, Yahweh's Jesus' dad. And I'm like, Jesus never said that. I'm not convinced. Okay. Same thing with Jehovah. Same thing with all of these things. And then to make it worse, they took out the names of the gods in the Bible and made everything Lord. And everything Baal this, Baal that. And put a pin in that. I need you guys to remember Syria, where this all started. And I need you to remember Baal, because we're gonna circle back to that one soon. Like, okay, Hebrew rooters, let's just pull back a minute, because you may have stumbled upon a stroke of genius when you rejected Roman mainstream Christianity, but you still embrace Paul and the Trinity and all their mythologies that were tacked along with it. And you just turn your back on that part and go out of the frying pan and into the fire, because you left Rome and embraced Babylon. Duh. Why would you trust the rabbis and not trust Rome? Maybe you shouldn't trust either one of them. Look a little closer. Post-Babylonian exile Levite elite priesthood not only didn't have any land, but they never had the right to rule. So you're chasing all these laws written by a bunch of jankified post-Babylonian elite priesthood that wrote all this shit in and jankified the genealogies so they can control the people on behalf of Persia. And those guys are going to tell you the truth. Like, no, stop. Just stop. So the southern stories and the northern stories are a little bit different. This is why you're getting two stories in the Bible, because eventually, way after the Bronze Age, when we start writing shit down, once the Greeks come on the scene, we'll get there, and we actually have written cohesive language, okay? The Phoenicians goes away. The character Phoenician shit goes away, and we have the Greek language comes into play in the late Iron Age and after, like 1,000 more fucking years after David. They start writing down these oral traditional stories. And the South and the North don't agree on the family tradition. So this is why they're compromising the scribes, the people who are in charge of putting the story together in this collection of scrolls. You've got one Genesis story and another Genesis story. You've got one story that's all about, priesthood and sacrificing. And you've got another story that's like a little more cushy and cosmopolitan. We'll see that in a minute. But just remember, this wasn't one monolithic group. It's everyone telling their own version of the family drama over thousands of years in an apocalyptic warlord society. All right. So that's what we're dealing with here. So we've got a North versus South thing going on. And this is in the North. They had a lot more exposure to different people. And this had to do with the fact, okay, that if you look over on the map on the right, okay, the bigger map that shows you the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea, the people in the North have all of these colors right above them. And the people in the North are also on the coast of the sea. So they're dealing with these quote unquote Phoenician sea people that are coming in and out and in and out and in and out and up and over and all around. So the northern folks are getting much more exposure to a more diverse group of people, where in the South, Judah is not on the coast. Now, we're going to talk about that with David. But for right now, they're sort of to themselves, and they have a very different idea of God and worshiping God than the ones in the North. So the ones in the North are being more influenced by trade and lots of different people, and the South is a little more isolated, if you will. All right? So now, the North, God becomes El. Okay? Sometimes you'll hear El Elyon, Most High. Their idea of the God that they met, now remember, it's the same God. It's the God that was with Adam and Eve. It's the God that met Noah, told him to build the ark. It's the same God that talked to Abraham when he was crossing over. Same God that Melchizedek met in the desert. Same God that took care of Joseph over in Egypt. Same God that got him Moses and the Promised Land and the Jacobites. The God of their ancestors thousands of years ago. Okay, but they're getting their own cultural identity and attributes of their idea of this God as it's been passed down in the tradition of their warlord tribe. So in the North, El, they call it El, and it's a little more flexible. It's a more abstract, cosmopolitan idea, if you will, because God's sort of getting mixed in with the other gods and the other peoples, and they're being influenced by these other cultures over thousands of years. Okay? So their God sort of gets mixed in with all the other Baals. This is where you get the bull imagery and the word Lord thing, right? All the Baals and the Lords. And then at one point, God even had a wife because they had to adopt the wife God of the whatever. Long story. So, it's a little more flexible, their idea with who God is. They're calling him the Most High. That's where we get El Elyon. And the North, believe it or not, was more city-like because you had these coastal trading centers and you were exposed to more people because of its placement on the map and all of those different empires that were directly to the north. So they were more educated, they were more sophisticated, they were more cosmopolitan. Now, when I say cities, I'm not talking about like, New York, New Orleans, St. Louis, San Francisco, LA. I'm talking, like a couple thousand people, okay? But for the time, they're mixing and mingling a little bit more, and they're a little bit more cosmopolitan and diverse, if you will. So that's influencing over generations the idea of their God. So here comes the question to the north. All right, we're calling him El, we're calling him Lord, but who exactly are you speaking to and about? That's the big question for the north. Who are you really worshiping? Because your God kind of got mixed in and blended with all of these other attributes of all of these other gods. So who exactly is your God? And are you still worshiping the same God as your ancestors? That's the big question for the northern tribes. Now let's move to the south, which we think of as Judah. This was your Yahweh people. They called them Yahweh. Now, these guys were much more exclusive. They were specific and they were legalistic. This is where you're getting the 15,000 sacrificial Levitical priesthood laws. And they believed that you had to worship God in a certain way, in a certain place, and it was really big on sacrifice. Okay. But at this time, Jerusalem in the center of Judah wasn't a city. Okay, it wasn't a city. It was a po-dunk, nothing, nowhere town. And that's just where they happened to think was the certain place to worship, in the temple, in this place. So even in Judah, let's go back to our map real quick. Okay, back here. Even in Judah, down here, I hope you can see it, right next to the Dead Sea at the bottom of the page. It's the dark pink at the bottom of the page. That's Judah. And you can see Jerusalem is like up here with the tribe of Benjamin in the light pink, all right? If there was a temple or a place of worship outside of Jerusalem, they didn't want it because they didn't think it was appropriate to worship God in another place. Okay? So they're very, very exclusive, specific, certain people, certain places, certain ways to do things, and only the priests knew, and the sacrifice was very specific, and they had all these rituals. So the north is more flexible, and the south is more legalistic, if you will. And so then the question becomes, if you're going through all of these rituals and these very complex ways of worship, are you sure Yahweh's the right guy? So we've got two really different questions. Okay, the north is getting the God confused with all these other gods, and it's like, are you sure you're talking about the right one? And they're thinking, yeah, well, as long as you go into the temple and do something, it's like, and we know who we're talking to. Yeah, but do you? And then over in the south, it's like we're going crazy and being really legalistic to make sure we do everything just exactly perfectly. But are you sure you're doing it for the right guy? And that's sort of the question that arises in the Bible through the entire Bronze Age.
Energy. Energy. You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. all those in the depths. All of those who are listening. Don't listen left is judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy.